everyone, my name is Merisa Sirait from Class B English Literature, University of Sumatera Utara. In this video, I will give a brief explanation about neurolinguistic. Neurolinguistics studies the relation of language and communication to different aspects of brain function. In other words, it tries to explore how the brain understands and produces language and communication. This involves attempting to combine neurological or neurophysiological theory, how the brain is structured and how it functions, with linguistic theory, how language is structured and how it functions. Apart from neurology and linguistics, psychology is another central source discipline for neurolinguistics. Neurolinguistics has a very close relationship to psycholinguistics, but focuses more on studies of the brain. Studies of language and communication after brain damage are perhaps the most common type of neurolinguistic studies. However, experiments, model construction, computer simulations, and neuroimaging studies are also very frequently used methods today. The interdisciplinary character of the field. Brain and language states that its interdisciplinary focus includes the fields of linguistics, neuroanatomy, neurology, neurophysiology, philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, speech pathology, computer science, neurobiology, anthropology, chemistry, cognitive science, and artificial intelligence. Thus, the humanities and medical, natural, and social science, as well as technology, are all represented. Acquired language disorder. Aphasia is defined as language loss due to brain damage. Examples of the causes are an infection or blockage of blood vessels in the brain, a hemorrhage, bursting of a blood vessel, or a head trauma. Acquired disorders can also be caused by progressive neurological diseases, such as dementias. Developmental language disorders. Developmental language disorders are disorders that are found in children who have not experienced any specific lesion event. Neurolinguistic approaches to developmental language disorder, such as SLI or specific language disorder, and developmental reading and writing problems, including dyslexia. Different views of the brain-language relationship. Localism. Localism claims that different higher functions are localized in different centers of the brain, mainly the cortex. Either the centers can be seen as sisters, being equally important, or one center, such as the prefrontal area in front of the frontal lobes, may be seen as superordinate to the others. In this view, aphasia is seen as the result of a lesion in the language center. Associationism or connectionism. Associationism assumes that higher functions are dependent on the connection between different centers in the cortex. Linguistic ability is seen as the relationship between images and words. Aphasia results from broken connections between the centers that are needed for linguistic function. Dynamic localization of function. With this type of theory, different subfunctions are seen as localized in different parts of the brain. These subfunctions must be combined in order to achieve more complex functions, which can be put together in a number of different ways. The relationship between a localized lesion and the function that are disturbed becomes more complex in this case. Hierarchical or evolution-based view. Evolution-based theories emphasize the layered structure of the brain from inner or lower and more primitive structures to the later developed and superimposed cortical layer and the role of all of these layers in language and communication. Holism. Holism is the opinion that the brain works as a whole, at least to accomplish higher functions. The cortex is said to handle, for example, higher cognitive functions, symbolic thinking, intelligence, or abstraction, and aphasia is a sign of a general cognitive loss, not a specific language loss. This view has also been called connectivism. Other terms: unitarism and equipotentiality. Unitarism is the view that the soul is one and cannot be divided. Equipotentiality means that all parts of the cortex have the same functional potential and that the size of a brain lesion determines the extent of the aphasia, the mass effect. Trouble or language disturbance. Language disorder is also known as aphasia. The types of aphasia are Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, pure word deafness aphasia, conduction aphasia, anomic aphasia, apraxia aphasia, global aphasia, and aphasia reading and writing or dyslexia. Broca's aphasia. Broca's area is located in the posterior frontal lobes of the cerebral cortex and it is close to Wernicke's area. Broca's area is not only a role in the motor system, but it also involves a very complex language skills such as word processing, grammar, sentence discern whether active and passive sentences, subject, predicate, object, and statement. People who suffer damage or injury to the Broca area can understand the language very well, but it cannot form words or reproduce a sound. Adults who suffer from Broca's aphasia will be able to see his speech as the speech of children who are in the telegraph stage. With Broca's aphasia, patients evidently had lost knowledge of syntax, which makes it difficult for him to understand and make a speech. But what is fascinating is that the patient can sing using the same words but cannot produce the same speech. Wernicke's aphasia. Wernicke's aphasia is characterized by a similar speech but unsubstantiated talk or nonsense speech. Pronunciation and grammar is correct, but any word spoken by the patient does not contain meaning. This is because the patient's speech is like normal speech, until the listener thinks that he mishears the speech of the patient, which is why he could not understand the purpose of the patient. Often, patients with aphasia provide substitute words for the right words based on the same sounds, association, or other characteristics. In conclusion, Wernicke's aphasia is an individual understanding of speech that is gone, but not hearing in the sound of language and music. Pure word deafness aphasia. This type of aphasia happens when an injury occurs in the area leading to the Wernicke's area from auditory field. These patients could not identify the correct word sound. A patient can recognize the melody of new song but cannot recognize the lyrics. Conduction aphasia. When people have a pretty good understanding of speech but are relatively weak to repeat the words, they are known as conduction aphasia patients. Patients will replace the same sound with the sound of a real word. For example, to tiddy, first tidding, is replaced with say tit, and to bubble is replaced with the word bubble. Some may repeat 4 or 5 digit range, for example, 4, 5, 9, 2, 3, 8, 4, 2, 7, but could not repeat simple sentences with rhythm of 3 syllables. For example, Joe is here, Betty sang. Anomic aphasia and apraxia aphasia. Anomic aphasia involves in trouble of finding words that coincide with spontaneous speech, although understanding of language and repeated words are good. For example, the difficulty of finding the right name for an object. This phenomenon is experienced by most people at certain times, such as, hand me that thing over there. Apraxia aphasia is patients who fail to respond reasonably to verbal instructions. These patients are unable to perform match movement with sensory motor by hand, even though they understand the direction. For example, the patient could not pick a pen that fell on the floor spontaneously. Global aphasia. The cause of injury in the left hemisphere or critical injuries in connection areas of language that demonstrate most or all affecting aspect of language in the patient is called global aphasia. Injuries that occur in the brains of patients can result in physical and verbal disorder. Physically, the patients would experience paralyzed right side of the mouth that becomes distorted and the elasticity of tongue will not be sufficient. These patients will experience a slight speech understanding and it causes the patient to use stereotypical arrangements of sounds used repeatedly in the same form. Aphasia in reading and writing, or dyslexia. There are several types of dyslexia. Deep dyslexia. Persons with deep dyslexia make the following kinds of mistakes when they read, in addition to being unable to read new words and non-words. Visual errors. A visually similar word is substituted. For example, cat becomes cap. Semantic errors. A semantic substitution is made. For example, cat becomes dog. Visual plus semantic errors. For example, pivot becomes pilot, then airplane. Derivation errors. For example, lovely becomes loving. Exchanges of function words. For example, and becomes on. Pure alexia. Persons with pure alexia can write, but they cannot read, not even something they have just written themselves. There are also individuals who are experiencing where he can speak his voice, but when speech is heard from recorded to him, he could not understand the speech himself. Agraphia, resulting in patients experiencing trouble writing. For people who suffer from pure agraphia, the patient cannot write using his or her hand, and yet still it can be used for other purposes. However, there are individuals suffering from both conditions simultaneously. That's all my presentation for this video. I apologize if I made mistakes during my presentation. Thank you so much for watching.